We have two wonderful developers with us here today. Joyce, also known as Millions Art on Twitter, an incredible technical artist that you definitely have already heard of, and Andrew Shouldice, the one-person developer of Tunic. Joyce, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Hi, I'm Joyce. I'm back here again on another Unity stream. I make tutorials for Unity, and I'm also a solo developer, but we're all, of course, here for Tunic. So, hope you're all ready for a very exciting stream.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to dissect the VFX and shaders with you. Can't wait to have your insight on all of that. How about yourself, Andrew? Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Andrew Shouldice, and I'm working on, or I guess worked on, Tunic. I've got to change how I say that now. The game's out.
Congratulations.
Last Wednesday.
Yeah.
I'm one of a few people that worked on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you haven't checked Tunic out already, please check it out. We'll be dropping a link to the Steam page in the chat. Definitely go check it out. People are loving it online. Congratulations on the successful launch. It's a beautiful game, and we're going to dive into the editor to understand more about how it was made. But before that, Andrew, I would love for you to give us just a little history, your game development history, and the history of Tunic.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So Tunic is an isometric action adventure about a tiny fox in a big world where you explore the wilderness, fight monsters, and find secrets.
Okay.
It's a game that's sort of about true discovery, finding things you weren't meant to find. And it has in it instruction manual pages, sort of the pages of the manual for the game that you're playing in the game itself that have all sorts of hints and tricks and secrets, like maps and descriptions of enemies and maybe some more secret stuff.
Yeah, those maps and stuff look like a complete, like the nostalgia I got thinking about the old NES manuals of like Zelda 1 and 2. It just looks so good, but you brought it back in like a modern way. It just looks really fantastic.
Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. But before we dive more into this, let's play the trailer for Tunic. So we'll cut to that trailer real quick, and then we'll come back and play the game. Just the first thing you notice when you watch that trailer is just how beautiful the art style is, and we're going to dive into that later in the show. But first of all, we're going to switch to Joyce's screen to look at some of the gameplay. So Joyce will be playing the game for us, while Andrew will be giving us some developer commentary. We're getting some comments in the chat from Sambero that you two are two of the most inspiring game dev people for him, and I am not surprised. You guys are killing it. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and Code Monkey asks, quick question, how long was the development? Feels like the game was announced around 4 years ago.
I've been working on it for a little over 7 years now. So it's been a while, and it feels really good to finally have it be out.
Yeah, and check out the game.
I don't think you didn't miss anything. This is just the start.
All right. So we're coming to this now.
We mentioned before that Tunic is a game about exploration, discovery, and combat and secrets. And when you start, we sort of drop you right in with very little pretext. You're controlling your character pretty soon, and you're free to explore.
That's what I'm doing.
And so if you might notice that the world is full of these strange glyphs that are meant to make you feel like maybe you don't belong in this place.
I see.
Even the UI, and later on when we collect manual pages, you'll see that sort of unreadable text is all over the place.
Interesting. So there's a sense of mystery right from the start.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And it's a real video game because you get a stick and you can use it to smash pots.
And maybe light one end of the stick, maybe? Does that happen? To create a torch? Light one end of the stick to create a torch, maybe, at some point?
Who knows?
Who knows?
No spoilers.
So for this sort of stream, we thought about what would be interesting and fun for people to take a look at. And one of the things that I really enjoy and is fun to show are some visual effects. So one of the things that we're going to showcase a little bit is an effect that happens quite early in the game. So when Joyce makes her way to the sort of top of this grand staircase at the beginning, the giant gold door, and when we talk to that, we'll see a sequence with some large structures with some associated special effects.
Right off the bat, this is just so beautiful, honestly. Such a great first impression for players. Yeah.
Thank you. That's one of the things that we're probably going to mention a few times on the stream is the incredible value of scrolling textures. Just
Absolutely.
two textures passing over one another, infinite possibilities.
The amount you can pull off with scrolling textures.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. It's the subtitle of the talk.
Can I interact with the door?
Yeah, go for it.
Or okay.
We have a comment in the chat saying Ray March says, "I remember this guy's smooth voice from a Pro Builder video."
Yeah, from back in the day.
Back in the day, a few Pro Builder tutorials, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Showing people how I built levels in that tool.
Absolutely.
And yeah, we still use that tool for Tunic. It's a very cool thing.
Yeah. If we have some time at the end, we can jump into that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So here we've entered this ethereal dream world, and we see these two tuning forks maybe here. Mm-hmm. And when we interact with them, we see an effect that we'll dive into a little bit more deeply.
Right. Yeah, those beams of light that fly in and cause that big energy burst. That's what we're going to look at, right? A little later.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and we're going to be looking at everything in editor, so you're going to be able to follow along completely if you're a Unity developer and try this at home, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Make your own Tunic at home.
There you go. And I would love for you to talk about some of the inspirations. Maybe we spoke about Zelda already, but I'm sure there were more inspirations than that. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of older video games have this sort of tendency to let you explore. They don't tell you everything.
Yeah. Just
for reasons of text capacity on old cartridges or just being a little bit obtuse. And we really wanted to capture that feeling of, exploring a space that feels like maybe it's not made for you.
Right.
Part of that is the instruction manual. Part of that is the strange glyphs. There have been a few inspirations visually. I really like isometric video games. I see someone in the chat Steele asking about whether or not we're using a perspective camera with a low FOV or an actual true orthographic camera to get the isometric view.
That's a good question.
It's a true orthographic projection camera, which is a little bit tricky because there are some things that you can and can't do with a true orthographic view.
Could you give us an example,
really
like one of those things?
Yeah, for sure. So the deferred rendering doesn't work properly with an orthographic view. So we are using forward rendering for everything, and having to do some interesting tricks to make sure that we get a nice performant product doing that. And also there are some other issues using a perspective camera where the distance gets a little bit strange. You need to pull the camera way back to have something approximating an actual parallel like frustum, and things get a little bit squirrely there with things like texture or shadow detail and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Phil Barracks in the chat asks, was this all dynamic lighting?
Largely, there's a lot of GI work going on, and so it's pre-computed stuff, I guess, but most of the there's no sort of traditional fine-grained light maps. They're all using the sort of broad strokes, low resolution GI bounce pre-computed light maps.
Okay. Cool. We have a lot of people in the chat right now who say they've been following you for years now, and they're so happy that the game is released. And a lot of people talking. There's a comment of someone saying this is one of the best art styles they've seen in quite a while, and yeah, so it's all high praise. Congratulations again on the release. I just want to drop the link to the game one more time in the chat, and I think this is a good time to jump into your screen share. Or actually, we're going to play some of the B-roll of the old Tunic Vines, I believe, when it was originally called Secret Legend, right? We can talk about that development journey and how you got to this point, right? It didn't just start off looking like this. Everyone starts somewhere, and we're going to look at that, right? So please speak to these.
Sure. So way back in the day, I was thinking, I'm going to make this game. It's going to have a fox. You're going to run around, and I did not know very much about 3D modeling, and so the fox was mostly made on graph paper to start.
Okay.
I'll put a vertex here, a vertex there. And over the years, I got more confident with my modeling skills, and also realized that making a game about a ruined world requires there be a little bit more visual detail, sort of visual interest and noise in the world. And so this original, extremely flat shaded view evolved into something that has a little bit more visual interest, a little bit more detail, a little bit more texture work, but tries to stay true to that highly geometric, sort of low poly-ish origin.
Okay, nice. And then I think now would be also a good time to jump into your screen share, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Jeff Game Dev says he loves the way the game lets the player discover gameplay mechanics through the lost manual pages. So I guess those mechanics are accessible to you from the beginning? You just need to know how to use them, or how does that work?
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that you'll notice when you're playing the game is that you might find a manual page or something like that says, oh, I can do this. And yes, absolutely you can. And we don't gate progress in any way based on having discovered manual pages. If there's information in the book, then it's part of the game, right? You just learned about it at a particular point.
Okay, that's cool. So it's just more about acquiring knowledge rather than unlocking different skills and things like that, right? I love that.
Absolutely. So part of the journey is discovering new things about the world, and this sort of thing that maybe once you've learned a thing or two, you'll revisit certain parts of the game and realize, I can approach this in a totally different way.
So you're really putting a lot in the hands of the player to make those kinds of discoveries and decisions on when to go back, when to move forward, and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of risky, and it seems like it's landing for a lot of people, so I consider that a success.
Yeah, of course. And so everyone was commenting on the visuals, so we're actually going to look at that now, starting with the scrolling texture effect we mentioned earlier, those beams of light that all slam into each other. So maybe you can break this down for us. You mentioned something about scrolling textures, I think.
Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah. Let's go.
I'm just gonna hit play a little bit so we can see what's going on here. I like doing visual effects a whole lot, so it's a little bit of a self-indulgent thing to go through step by step.
Do it.
But hopefully people will find something useful there.
Stage is yours.
So this effect is made up of a few different components, and so maybe what I'll do is I'll enable and disable certain things and sort of give people a chance to see it built up part by part. So it starts with a sort of blast of light, and these starbursts, this could be sort of accomplished with particles, but in this case it made a lot more sense to just do it with meshes. So I think there's 3 there that are rotating very slightly out of sync.
Oh.
And I use Blender for a lot of the character animations in the game, but for things where I'm animating materials or transforms in Engine, in Unity, it makes a lot more sense to just use the built-in animation system, and sometimes timeline on top of that to do certain effects.
I love seeing the scene and game view side by side, and you know you've got something good when it looks good before all the post-processing is applied, even on the right, right?
We'll have to take a look at some of the post-processing stuff a little bit later.
Oh,
as well.
definitely.
So we'll turn off those starbursts and put on this called Aura Ring, which is, you guessed it, scrolling textures. This is I guess I could remove the material to show what's going on. Oh, maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't do that. But it's a sort of a ring with a sort of a radial UV texture going along it. So if you sort of cylinder projected something and then squished it and shrank one of the ends, this is the sort of shape that you'd get.
Yeah.
And so that means that when you scroll textures along it, they're going to scroll radially outward. So this effect sort of, along with those starbursts, has this sort of pulsing outward, and later on in the animation that same effect is reused at a slightly higher intensity to sort of turn on this, ambient coalescing of power or radiating of power.
Yeah. And
we can take a closer look at the what's behind that. It's a very innocuous looking texture. I think it's inverted as part of the shader, but the thing that I think makes this kind of cool is that it's got some built-in chromatic aberration. Okay. So instead of doing fancy post-processing to do color separation, it's just baked right into the texture, and that's, I think, just accomplished with some sort of channel offsets, or maybe just multiplying each of those with a color and offsetting them a little bit.
And you just do that in Photoshop before, or some program, image editing program, before bringing it in, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And I think this shader is pretty straightforward looking. Re-importing some stuff.
You're speaking Joyce's language right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not. I usually write my shaders, but nodes are also good.
Yeah.
I see you're using Shader Forge, but I think everything you're doing here should be also possible in Shader Graph.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I assume so, for sure. I used to write shaders by hand, but then I tried, this is Freya Holmer's tool, and it's just so much fun. If you're using a version of Unity that has the shader graph in it, I don't think there's anything that either one of them can do that the other can't, as far as I know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's might look a little snaggly, but you can see here we've got some UV coordinates that are just being scrolled, and this one's, they're just multiplying them together and then inverting it at the end to get the sort of white on black effect, and the whole thing is just an additive blend. You might not even need it, and maybe we're getting some interesting effects by multiplying them and then doing the inversion, but you could probably get away with losing the inversion and inverting the source textures for not that much different an effect. And
the end result just looks so good, and I love how you're just demystifying these VFX for everybody watching. It's great.
There's all computer programs are lies. All video games are lies.
It's all smoke and mirrors
Exactly.
Yes,
and
exactly.
scrolling textures.
And exactly.
Yeah, mirrors, and
Especially
smoke are actually
scrolling
some of the
textures.
harder things to do.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, mirrors especially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and so this one is something similar, just on a different shaped mesh, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So being able to take that same effect and just apply it to this sort of, I don't know, funnel cone looking thing is neat. And one of the things that I like with this technique, where you're having fairly basic effects applied to specifically authored meshes, is that by adjusting, say, UV coordinates, you can have the same material but have sort of, like in this case, an acceleration of things. You sort of have a scooping up of this energy as it's being coalesced and fired up into the sky. I don't actually really know what's going on here, but you'd accomplish that by having the UVs either closer or further apart on your mesh.
You have so many effects going on at once. I wonder, when you first sit down to build this, how do you brainstorm, the sequence of things? What the VFX is going to look like? Do you start with a paper and a pencil, or what's your process?
Paper and pencil usually. So I'll sit there and muse for a little while and think, like, what is the effect that you're trying to communicate in sort of an emotional sense? Like, is it a grand activation? Is it something powering down? Is it something getting hurt? And those things are an important starting point. But at that point, you can start sort of like sketching sort of a crude version of it with a bunch of like lines and pointing arrows and things.
Yeah. So you got to break it down into steps to make it accessible. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
I think same thing here. I think these are actually the same meshes reused with maybe a different instancing of the material, so they can be animated separately. So that's our little friend, the cone there again, just hanging out in the middle with all the colors ramped up. And then, it sort of does a little dance here to get a little bit of a starburst going on.
Okay.
And then we've got these friends.
Yes, these I really want to break down. And I think you also have this open in Blender for us to look at.
I don't know if I have these up and ready in Blender at the moment.
Okay,
but I can describe how they work there.
That's perfect.
They are, so I'll play the effect with just these in isolation so you can see what's going on. Yeah. Sort of motes of light sort of tracing paths and slamming in at the middle there. That could be accomplished with particles or Bezier curves or some sort of procedural thing. I'm simulating gravity, blah, blah, blah.
Lots of complex ways to pull it off.
Yeah, so what if we scrolled a texture?
A novel idea. A scrolling texture, really.
These are tubes.
Right.
That I think were originally authored as in Blender as just a big long tube that's been UV'd, and then you twist and rotate and distort it, and then duplicate it a bunch of times, maybe invert them. And because you've got UVs running along the length of the thing, you can take a texture and scroll it along it. So the texture in this case looks, it's not especially interesting. It's just sort of a hot white line down here at the bottom,
right,
and a very subtle gradient.
And then the post-processing with that bloom really makes it, like, hides any imperfections and just makes it glow, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if we were looking at this without any sort of, without the razzle-dazzle of bloom and so on, you'd see that, they're just tubes. I mean, maybe we could make this double-sided to hide it a little bit better, but it doesn't really matter most of the time.
Right.
Run a texture along it, and you can have this illusion of motes of light rolling along. And the brighter the color
and the brighter the color and closer to white, the more it's gonna glow, right? And so you have this trailing off effect of the light as it moves on. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you animate those colors and are careful about the colors that you choose, then you can get this sort of hot white point of light at the tip. And one of the things that I end up doing when choosing colors like this is choosing something like that's got a very, very high chroma, something that's really saturated, but then pulling that saturation down a little bit so that the other channels have some fun as well. So don't just pick, chromatic blue or red or green, but, maybe pick a secondary color and then pull it down a little so even the color on the opposite side of the wheel has a little bit of a contribution so that when you blow it out, when you hit that HDR, it blows out to white.
Okay, cool. And it's easy to just swap in colors, do some experimentation. I think that's part of what building VFX is all about, right? Experimenting and having fun. It's just a really fun part of the process, and you should take your time with it, right?
Yeah, it's cool. It's easy to get carried away. These sorts of things you can just spend hours and hours and hours doing, and it could be that it looked great hours ago, and you're just slowly making it worse by adding.
You have to wrap it up at some point, right?
Yeah, I mean, otherwise your video game would take 7 years to make, and that'd be no good, right?
So like, just to summarize what this is, it's a bunch of, like you said, some tubes that you stretched and twisted in Blender, brought into here, made sure you UV'd them, and then scrolled the texture with a certain gradient of colors along, and then we hit it with those post-processing effects with a scrolling texture. I mean, we were joking about the scrolling textures being an obvious choice, but a lot of people in the chat are like talking about how they just haven't thought of that approach before, and they think it's just such a brilliant method. And sometimes it just doesn't come to you, right, to do it this way. Sometimes we can gravitate towards more complex solutions when the end result is going to look the same, even if we go for a more simple solution. And I think you've shown that off very clearly over here. So
great.
Yeah.
If people like the idea of scrolling textures, there's this background that you can see here is very similar. It's a texture scrolling along with itself, and to get this sort of unusual interaction, in this case, sort of like a ghostly sort of gossamer set of clouds or whatever rolling over one another. What's often cool is to use the blending function that combines those two iterations of the texture is often multiply. And that's good for a lot of things. But in this case, using minimum, I think, I forget, Joyce, maybe this is your trick that I lifted from you. I forget. But using minimum as a way to blend those two things can also come up with some really neat effects.
But I'll take the credit.
Yeah, take the credit, yeah.
Why not? It's just the three of us here. No one's watching.
It was not me. These simple effects, they're quite often they are just the best.
Interesting.
Sometimes people look at my work and they think I've done something way more complicated than I did, and all I did was like cut off. I did a liquid effect, which is just solid colored back faces, which looks like I've done something really complicated. But, yes, there's something really nice in the simplicity of scrolling textures.
Agreed.
Absolutely, and it's going to be really performant, right? Like that's a much more complex thing is going to maybe be harder to run on some hardware.
Yes, that's true. We're thinking about optimization as well, right? Joyce, I was just wondering, when you first saw this scene, what is the first thing that stands out to you as a technical artist? What really drew your attention?
Well, I don't know if this is a technical artist thing, but to me the first thing that stood out was just the pretty gradient in the background.
Oh, yes, and we're going to talk about that pretty
gradient. It's my color scheme,
Totally. I wouldn't be surprised if I was subconsciously influenced by you, perhaps. Sort of,
we're all learning from each other here. We're all learning from each other.
So we can pull back the curtain on this scene. So this is that same scene, but with all the sort of geometry placed back into the world, and I can briefly turn off light maps. It's not a huge difference. Actually, let me turn them back on. But what I can do is I can strip away all the tricks, and we can look at a version that I've cooked up that is naked.
Okay, let's do it. So we're gonna look before and after post-processing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
nice.
this is pretty close to just raw geometry.
Nice.
I don't think this version even has any. Yeah, you can't really even tell the difference between the scene view and the game view almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is without even any light mapping going on, but we can turn that on to give.
It still looks good, I have to say, and that's why it looks so. I think that's important. You know, when it looks good before you add post processing, it really makes it look fantastic.
You've got the style is pretty, and the geometry and stuff also does a lot to the art style, of course.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just the lighting. You know, when you have complexity in the geometry, you know, the Carlos Scarpa kind of architecture with lots of little geometry, the interplay of light and shadows just makes things look good, and you've got that going on here.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess so. I guess you're right. That's one of the things that I mentioned earlier about how early on keeping everything extremely simple was sort of holding things back a little bit. That there needed to be just the right amount of visual detail without suddenly becoming, you know, the game is never going to be hyper realistic or anything like that. So trying to stay true to this sort of blocky geometric thing without having it just be a lot of flat shapes. And yeah, you're right. Having enough geometric complexity that the light catches on it is a good way to phrase that.
That's a level of detail. But yeah, go ahead.
So here we've got very, very little going on here. And one of the first things, this scene doesn't have any SSAO.
Right.
But that would be, say, one of the first things that would get added. Okay. But we do love our bloom. So we throw a little bloom on there. You can see now suddenly it's got a little bit more of this ethereal vibe.
Oh, yeah.
But it's still washed out. I'm using Amplify Color.
Okay.
With some custom lookup tables, which sort of really make it pop. We can adjust the...
And Amplify Create, the creators of Amplify Color have lots of incredible assets on the asset store. If you want to check those out, they've got like the shader editor, imposter, Amplify imposters. Go check that out after this. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. If you're not familiar with what like a tone mapping or color grading is, Amplify Color makes it quite easy, where if you've got Photoshop, you can just say, hey, take a screenshot of what's on, you know, in my game view right now, for instance, this, and throw that into Photoshop. And then as long as you follow certain rules, then you can do basically whatever you want, like add levels or color grading in Photoshop, adjustments on a per channel basis, and then sort of extract those changes based on a lookup table where every possible color is included in this little graphic.
Yeah.
And now that you've modified every single color, you can apply that to your entire scene.
I think that's great because it really allows you to work in the software that you're comfortable with, right? So if you're just super great at Photoshop and you really know how to make things look right, you can bring that in to Unity and then have it reflect in your game. And that's what you've done here, right? So, yeah.
So we've got a little bit of color grading put on there, and one of the things that I like to do is saturate shadows.
Okay.
And so even things that are sort of, you know, dark and gray looking, you can really sort of turn those up a great deal, and then you have this feeling that even the nooks and crannies of the world are seeing light from some direction. It might still be dark, but it's got that sort of richness to it.
So it gives it kind of like a feeling of global illumination, and maybe also like this is a place worth exploring still.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, okay.
Or maybe it's a place that we want to draw the eye away from, and we can find some really good secrets there.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Joyce mentioned also having this gradient applied to the whole thing.
Yes.
Which is a very cheap trick, but it's an effective one. So the way that the game is rendered, it's a series of sort of stacked cameras that have certain effects assigned to them, and the final blit to what ends up being displayed on the screen has a lot of screen space effects in it, like vignetting and flashing when you take damage, that sort of thing. But it also applies this gradient across the entire thing. And it's off right now. I've got full screen effects boring, but we can do full screen effects spirit realm. And you see here we've got this sort of what would you call that, Joyce? Is that like a magenta or something like that?
Looks about right.
Pinkish.
Yeah. like a pink, and then down to a sort of smoky blue in the corner, and that's just a big gradient applied across the whole viewport. I think it might even be using just the viewport coordinates for very easy math to blend between those colors.
And have you put it at a diagonal? The transition, the gradient? Did you set it to be at an angle like that? Nice. Okay. So you can just rotate that?
It's just it's even simpler than that. It's just upper right and lower left.
Oh.
I think I can change these live. Yeah. So you can mess around with these and
nice.
All sorts of kooky effects there.
It's really cool because it kind of has this effect like it's the background, but also it's having an effect on the foreground, like kind of it's like the swash of color just on the level as well. So it's working as a skybox, but also like as like some tint.
Yeah, exactly. And as you move around, it adds a little bit of visual interest. This is sort of like cranked way up right now, but you can see that it will give the impression of no matter where you are, there's maybe sort of something glowing off in the way, or maybe there's some bounced light in the main sort of like sunshiny overworld area that we saw before. I think it's probably it's like a gold in the upper right to simulate there's sort of sunshine coming in from that direction, and in the lower left I think there's sort of a blue glow to indicate maybe there's water just off screen, as there usually is in that area.
I see.
But then there's spooky dark areas that have sort of surreal, greens and stuff as well. It's a lot of fun to tweak and mess around.
It's kind of some storytelling. You're trying to hint at the greater context of what's around the level, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
With isometric perspective stuff, you don't really get a chance. I mean, we cheat a little bit and do this on occasion, but having situations where the camera, pulls out and shows, a castle off in the distance.
Yeah.
You can get those in 3D games with a traditional camera, but you need to do a lot of heavy implication if you've got this more or less fixed camera perspective.
It's true. It's more of a limited composition, so you have to find your own way to achieve those same effects. I would love to talk about the actual textures on the game. So, as we saw from the original Vines, the things looked a lot more flat before. You were going for a more like kind of flat, textureless art style. But as time went on, it started to look slightly different, and few textures started to make their way into the art style. So, could you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think I can pull up an old version of the world here.
Absolutely. Oh, great. So we get to see it. That was fast.
Here's maybe an example of...
Oh, wow.
Here's a little house in the world, and it's it's very bland and flat, and you can see even here that I'm starting to think about like, what if there was a little bit of extra detail added in places.
Right, a few touches here and there.
And that was sort of the beginning of, wait, no, you can't, these trees are sort of appealing looking geometrically. But the world sort of demanded a little bit more crumble, if that makes sense. Like I'm trying to, imply, here are some tiles that are broken and it's a little bit clunky. So having
some level of detail to make the world feel kind of like lived in, almost not too perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a certain video gaminess to the austere, straight lines, clean spaces, and stuff.
Right.
That we didn't want to lose, but being able to have something that looks a little bit more, lived in makes sense.
Yeah, nuanced.
Pull up another scene here without too many spoilers. Yeah, if you're watching this, you might be spoiled on all kinds of stuff.
Oh no.
So,
spoiler warning. No.
Yeah, we've got. I'll leave it to the scene view here, or I guess the game view is updating as well. But yeah, just a little bit more crumble added to the world, and going in and chipping things up and breaking them down a little bit more, making prefabs, whether they're built in Pro Builder or built in Unity, that have like the top broken off of a pillar or just a
Right.
pile of debris on the ground, and using those in a bunch of different areas to make the world, feel like it's been around for a little while.
Yeah, Tardy Gravy in the chat says it looks more like organic and natural, right? Because that's how natural materials act. They break down over time, and they, you see cracks in concrete and things like that. And I guess that's what you were going for. And you achieved that for the most part with textures, right? And I guess that's what kind of pushed you in that direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
So I guess it's one of those other things where sometimes the simplest answer is best, but you could go in and come up with some very sophisticated way of, doing level of detail on the geometry and stuff like that. But you know what? Not scrolling textures also good.
It's textures that stay in their place. Finally, for the art and aesthetic, I'd love to look at the grass. Everybody loves the grass in this game. It's just so fun to walk through. It's so juicy. Maybe you could show us how that was achieved.
Yeah, it's another decent example of how a very simple, maybe naive implementation, sometimes you can just get away with that.
Mm-hmm.
So let me go to, maybe this is a decent way to look at it. I've got a giant, this was actually a debug scene to see, what we could get away with as far as batching grass went. But
right.
I'll fire it up here and take a walk around. The grass actually was one of the very first things that I worked on. It's always a little bit strange when people say, "Oh, my favorite pet is the grass." That was like week 2.
You were killing it right from the start, Andrew. What can we say?
So I'm just going to walk slowly through here.
Yeah, sure.
See, we've got the grass sort of moving a little bit.
Right.
Because the grass was so early, it still has this very geometric look, despite a lot of other things being a little bit more refined.
Right.
So very early on, we need to make sure that the player is confronted with grass in front of them, so they know it's not spikes or something. Like
Oh,
I
I
need
see.
to walk through it and realize, oh no, that's just grass. I think that's fine.
Trying to have people understand the language of the game right off the start, right? Right off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, nice. Cut that grass.
So I'll maybe stand in front of some grass and give you an idea of how very naive it is.
Mm-hmm.
If we can get in close, I'm going to turn off some gizmos maybe because there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
It's they've got colliders on them, and they just say like, "Hey, I noticed that there's something entered my sphere collider." I guess I need gizmos on now to see what's going on. I know where it is,
Okay.
and so I can cross product to get an axis around which to rotate.
Okay.
I'm just going to rotate away from it based on how far away it is. So there's no hinges or anything like that.
I love that.
Yeah, and because it's leveraging the physics engine, you can have lots of them, and it may take a moment to make sure that they're all registered with the physics engine. But you're not taking a huge hit for the colliders that are not moving and just hanging out on the other side of the world.
Absolutely. I mean, you see grass.
That's how physics works.
You see grass in a few other games that might, there are different ways to do it. You could use like a vertex shader, all kinds of different ways to do it. But this, and again, another like simple solution that just works super well and always stands out to everybody who sees it. So I really love this. That's why we wanted to highlight it for everyone to see.
Do you want to
Is
set
this
everything
rotating
on
based
fire?
on the pivots?
Yeah, exactly. So it's just sitting at the bottom there. I think I might actually have. Do I dare show my code? What is it called? Grass.cs. Yeah,
KW Mar in the chat asks, isn't this expensive, this process of rotating all the blades as you walk through them?
Because it's in on-trigger stay, it doesn't happen if there's nothing nearby. In fact, an artifact of that is that if for some reason something disappears and doesn't register as having disappeared, it will stay rotated.
Right.
Like it doesn't get the exit. I guess I could fix that by having it reset on trigger exit, I guess. But it seems to be okay.
Okay.
Maybe it would be a problem at some point, but to answer your question, it seems to be okay. It's not there's not an update. I want to make sure there's not an update. No, there isn't an update on it. So
It's performant enough. Oh, we're pulling out the code, the big guns on stream. Let's go.
yeah, so I mean, maybe there's an error in this or something embarrassing. I don't know, but yeah, just rotate based. Like take your initial rotation and rotate around this rotation axis that you find from looking at a cross product between your vector to the collider and up.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much
I
for
can't actually
sharing.
read it because the preview is too pixelated, but
You can watch the VOD. You can come back after and watch the VOD, Joyce. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
This will all be up on Twitch, and we'll upload them to YouTube later, so you can full screen to your heart's desire. Oh wow!
I've got these fire bombs. What do you say? Should we go? For
Yeah, let's just burn.
Do it.
Just burn everything.
Burn it all down.
Do it. Oh my! That's crazy.
Fire.
Oh wow!
Just for the stream,
That's
exclusive.
a lot, doesn't it?
Oh my god, that's so
it
cool.
does. Doesn't exist. This is an inaccessible scene in the real game. But hey, and because I chopped some down before, we have this preserved grass.
Preserved grass. Okay, so now that we've destroyed all the grass and there's no more grass to talk about, let's talk about the character controller and the animations. Are you going to break that down a little bit for us? Mostly, I think we're going to talk about just like, animation curves for combat, how you use nav mesh and blend trees, and then if we have some time, we'll wrap it up with some boss behavior.
Sure, yeah. We'll see what we can get to, and if people have questions in the chat, we can.
Absolutely, please.
Talk about that as well.
Joyce and Andrew are our guests. As I always say, everybody in the chat is also our guest, and we want to take your questions, and I'll ask them live as soon as you ask them. So please throw your questions for Tunic into the chat.
I saw a good one earlier. I don't know if I can start with one.
Yes, absolutely.
I saw a question about how do you prevent the player from walking off the edge? I don't know what solution you... I don't remember what the asked it.
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's pertinent for sure. So Unity comes with a nav mesh system, which typically is used for letting enemies figure out how to get to the player or how to navigate up a hillside or whatever. But it's also just a really nice low resolution, geometric resolution representation of the world. And I guess I can probably, if I do, oops, that's Chrome, window, normally I do this search. I think that's probably safe to do.
Yeah. Good call. Sin Alex in the chat says, I definitely expected it to be a vertex shader displacement. Well, there you go. I guess back to the grass. Yeah.
Is it navigation? I don't remember where navigation is. I guess I could pop to my actual layout here.
Okay.
I hope there's no secrets. So yeah, you can see.
Oh, there we go. Perfect.
There's your nav mesh. So this is used. This has double duty. This is used for for enemies to find out, say, how to get to the player. But
nice.
It can also be sampled. So you can say, hey, given this point, what's a nearby point on the nav mesh? And you can use this to make sure that the player doesn't, fall off edges. And you can also do some tricks to make sure that they can fall off edges in certain circumstances.
Oh, interesting.
Which gets sort of tricky as well.
So it's one nav mesh, but you're using it for two different purposes. You're calling on it for two different things, for the enemies, but also for the player, and limiting them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool.
In this case, there are two nav meshes because there's another one for sort of like wider enemies that can't fit through certain gaps. So enemy behavior, they will have a nav mesh agent on them,
okay.
Which, I mean, if you let a nav mesh agent do your work for you, it will by default sort of move to whatever target you want. But you don't need to necessarily do that. You can just consult the nav mesh agent and say, hey,
right.
Which direction would you want to go?
Right.
And then you can use that information to feed it into an animation controller via parameters. So you can take that and say, well, I know you want to go that way, but that way is behind you. So I'm going to say you want to travel behind you, or you could say you want to turn 180 degrees. That means that you can use information about the nav mesh to drive root motion based enemy behavior, which is really nice and cool. It means that you can scale your enemies appropriately and their footfall sort of makes sense. That is it's a bit of a strange chain to go from a nav mesh agent to all the way through that chain to actually moving it in like on a domain remove and having that in turn talk to the physics system to move the rigid body that represents the monster. But by doing that, you get a nice effect of having the nav mesh tell you where you want to go, the physics system work properly so that enemies can bump into things and move around debris.
Right.
And also have the advantage of doing root motion and all the benefits that gives.
Okay.
So here's an example of a don't look at my shame, all the animation graphs.
Don't worry, it's always like that.
It's always like this, don't worry.
It's always like this.
It is what it is.
I won't show you the player character one, but what I could show you is when I was first doing animations in Unity, like authoring them with the Unity animation system, it was very straightforward to do things like turn colliders on and off. As an enemy swings a sword, you turn its collider on at a particular point, you turn it off at a particular point. When authoring things in Blender, I've never found an especially good way to have information from Blender move over into Unity. There are ways of doing it, but they didn't have that same degree of control. So the sort of middle ground that I ended up using was animation curves. So supplementing animations in the animation import.
Nice. So maybe you could show that to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I don't know what this is. Oh, don't open an Autodesk preview. If I'm going to have to... I made all these views in the hopes that they would be easier to see, but now I'm trying to just run around the whole project, and I'm not used to seeing things, so I'm just
no worries.
The original ones.
And if you have any questions, again, for Joyce or Andrew, please throw them in the chat, and I'll ask them right now. We have one question, unrelated, but what's the cat's name? I have no idea which cat you're speaking about. Is there a cat next to me?
My cat just woke up. I'm not even sitting on my desk chair. I'm sitting on like a terrible kitchen chair.
Oh, okay. So you have to answer the question. What's the cat's name, Joyce?
If it was my cat, it's Biscuit.
There we go. It's Biscuit. There you go. There's your answer.
So after importing an animation from Blender, if I wanted to augment it with things like how fast does this enemy turn to face the player when they're attacking? So part of the design of the game is that the orientation of enemies is really important.
Right.
And so being able to control which parts of the animation it's allowed to turn to face you is so here at the beginning, the enemy can turn to face you, but once they start their wind up, they're sort of locked into their animation when they do this way. You can see there's also a curve for whether or not the hitbox of their sword is going to damage you. So if you just run up to them when they're not attacking, it's fine.
So this is very like animation-based combat, right? So it's not like there's like a sphere spawning in front of, like a sphere hitbox spawning in front of the enemy. The collider or hitbox is actually the sword itself. So it's similar to maybe Dark Souls in that way? Am I mistaken, or is that right?
Yeah, totally. So that's... if you're swinging your sword, but it hasn't yet made contact with the enemy, Oh,
that's really cool.
And that has some interesting side effects. It means that you can, watch enemies hit other enemies sometimes.
Oh, nice.
Be able to do damage to them. Or if you, without having too many spoilers, there's an enemy later on that has a big wide attack, and if you happen to hit it at just the right time so it flinches, it's possible for that big wide attack to just sort of skip over your head.
Oh, great.
Because everything is very physically based.
Okay, so it's very fair in that way, where if you get hit, it's because you got hit by exactly the point of the sword or something along those lines. So I like that kind of gameplay.
There's a lot of control afforded by adjusting these curves and adding, where is this enemy especially vulnerable? When does this attack work against them or not work against them? It's also used, this is a very simple early enemy, so there's not a whole lot going on, but there are other more complex things like bosses where visual effects, whether or not this particle system is playing or if this trail is being rendered, or even things like how how hotly emissive is this material,
Right.
can all be controlled with animation curves.
And how about that boss behavior? You mentioned that just now, just a second ago. How does that come into all of this?
Yeah, so each boss is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And yeah, I won't show any big bosses or anything like that.
Okay.
I don't want to spoil anybody.
Save it for the game. Get the game. It's out.
But one technique that I found that is sort of neat. I don't know in the end how useful it will be across the board, but,
Okay.
but someone might find it interesting. Is to is to have this sort of delegate-based system where let's say you've got a thing where you say, okay, enemies in a particular space, it's in front of you're directly in front of the boss or whatever, or you're behind it and the boss needs to make a decision about how it's going to behave in that circumstance. You can sort of roll a die by having a series of delegates in a function that has I forget what it's called in C#, but like a parameter, like an arbitrarily long list of arguments or parameters provided to a function.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of a fun way to do this, where you've got a bunch of delegates that have individual behaviors, and sort of building this sort of deck of cards that the boss can choose from. Some of them even, you can do stuff like throw something in twice if you want it to happen twice as frequently.
Oh, okay, nice.
I think there's at least one boss where this is actually modeled like a deck of cards, where it's got a particular sequence, and it uses that same sequence repeatedly, but it shuffles it each time. So certain attacks will only appear once in a given amount of time, and it's possible that it will appear right after itself if the shuffling happens to work out that way, but it keeps the sort of distribution of behavior interesting.
Yeah, is there sometimes like a mix of the two where there's some predetermined behavior, but also based off of your positioning, the decisions the boss makes will change depending. Let's say you're far away, they'll start to shoot projectiles. You get closer, they'll start another sequence. Is there like that combination there as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And each one of the bosses is different, so it's give and take, sort of like design wise and implementation wise, to figure out how best to get the effect that you want in each individual circumstance.
Okay, Joyce, I know you're working on your own game. Do you have any boss fights in your game, or how?
Oh God, I haven't started yet. So anything you say, it's all going in here.
It's all going in, right? I'm sure everybody watching.
Screaming, so I had to mute myself.
No worries. Yeah. I'm sure anybody who's working on a similar type of game is just like taking this all in, using this as inspiration. So
yes,
thank you so much,
definitely.
Andrew, for like sharing all of this with us. Is there anything else on animation that maybe we can go over that you had prepared for us?
I'm happy to take questions if people have them. It's less exciting than the visual stuff, I understand, so I'm just sort of like trying to put something cool on the screen while we talk about it. But
yeah, absolutely. So we have Eternal Light 2 says, are the edge shadows ambient occlusion / baked light maps, or a combination? Thanks for the question.
That's a good question. So
Yeah.
here, let's maybe go to just a very basic scene here. Speaking of, there's some more scrolling textures for you there.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, let's throw some things in here to see what this person is talking about. This is all SSAO. You can see in there. We've now got this bright crystal emanating cosmic energy out, which is maybe we'll turn that off for the sake of demonstration. But this darkness that you see in there is all SSAO. Okay. So some of what you're seeing is the bounced light calculations, and I can go into indirect to show what that looks like.
Yeah.
You see, you get a little bit of shadowing inside there, but generally speaking, we're leaning on SSAO pretty hard, and it's. We might have changed this, but it's a modified version of one of the built-in shaders, I think, to not require a depth normal texture, because we're using forward rendering and don't have access to the full suite of G buffer stuff. It makes a lot of sense to keep it simple and just use a depth map, because I think something like dynamic batching doesn't work with generating depth normal stuff, something like that. And so we've got like a field full of blades of grass.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you're not rendering each one of those individually into a texture that you're just using for a visual effect like SSAO.
Nice. Okay, so a few tricks that come together. That was a great question. Thank you. We have speaking of boss fights, TyMO says, building a game is a never-ending boss fight. I don't know if that's what it felt like for you. I like that.
Finally beat it, Andrew.
You beat it. You beat it. Now for the DLC. No, I'm just kidding. A question from Tardy Gravy to Andrew. Were you a solo developer during the whole project? If so, how's your design creative process since you don't have somebody to bounce ideas off of? We have a lot of solo developers in our community, and I think that's a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out just on my own from the beginning, but quickly realized that there are lots and lots of things that I am no good at. So I can pour hours and hours into making a shader or doing animations or programming or even design, but I knew that I needed help with stuff like audio. And so Power Up Audio, specifically Kevin Regami, was brought on board fairly soon, and as were Lifeformed, which is Janice Kwan and Terrence Lee, to do music. And even then, at that point, I was mostly looking at the raw files of the project by myself. And you say, the person who asked the question mentioned, how do you manage your design process when you're just staring at this thing over and over?
Yeah.
And that's where partnering with a publisher like Finji really helped out, because
interesting.
It would be an understatement to say that they were just publishing the game. They were definitely instrumental in being able to just have the game in someone else's brain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's so nice to hear.
This is a particular. This is very particular to my circumstance, but in general, to answer your question, I would say having someone to bounce ideas off of is very valuable. And so just being by yourself and toiling on something for years and years is, for me at least, not as productive as being able to share that with someone for a number of reasons. One, someone can tell you this part is bad and this needs to be fixed. But often it's someone saying, this part is good enough. You can move on with your life. Don't fret about this one thing. It's
Absolutely.
not as important as you think it is.
And sometimes our work is right here, right in front of us, and you just need to take a step back and look at it through different eyes almost, right? And that's why playtesting is so important in just in game development in general, and playtesting early and often. So I wonder, did Finji help you with playtesting at all? Did they get focus groups there for you? What was that process like?
The process of doing playtesting the game about sort of a slow burn discovery of secrets is tricky for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've got something in my eye suddenly. Okay.
Take your time.
So what we ended up doing was doing traditional playtests where we would, let people play the game and sort of watch over their shoulder, either via a streaming thing or getting them to maybe record their playthrough so we could watch it.
Yeah.
But one of the most valuable things with Fiji in particular is just having a QA team that is as absolutely phenomenal as theirs is, being able to go in and take what could be maybe considered a little bit rickety, a project that has not been put through the QA grinder and turn it into a real product.
Okay, so they did help a lot with that then. Okay, and how dramatic was the feedback that you got from those playtests? Did it change the game dramatically, or was it just fine tuning at that point?
It depends. It depends on the phase of development. There are definitely playtests that have early on, especially, that made me realize that the light touch that the game is sort of centered around, where it doesn't really tell you what to do or what you're quote-unquote supposed to be doing, was a very delicate balance. So early playtests of people playing and saying, don't know what I'm doing, I'm I'm going to new areas, but I don't know why.
Okay.
Definitely helped inform some of the decisions we made about pacing and that sort of thing. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's just thousands and thousands of tiny little tweaks that we made, whether it was QA or playtesting or putting out demos and being able to watch people play on Twitch.
Right. Oh,
or what
yes.
have you. Because in that case, you can sit in chat and watch someone play a video game without them knowing that the designer is kind of over their shoulder.
Oh, that makes a big difference, doesn't it?
They do.
They're not just trying to please you with their reaction. They're giving a genuine reaction to their own Twitch audience. And so the real deal. Like,
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
that can be very useful for things like understanding where players notice things on the screen. Just the tiniest bit of motion on the screen might draw their eye and completely change their sort of flow through an area. And that was really a fascinating thing to be able to see.
okay, I find that it's always the playtests that hit the developers the hardest. These are the ones that create the best results at the end, because it kind of makes you rethink a lot of things and then really have to try new things for the next playtest. I don't know if you feel the same way, but just in my experience. We have a few more questions from the chat. Thank you so much, chat, for being so engaged and throwing all these questions in here. Really appreciate it. So glad you're with us. Smirking Raven says, how do you choose your color by scenes? Did you start from concept art or just play with the post-process? That's really interesting. Was there any concept art for this game?
Not really, because
Okay.
I'm not an illustrator. Like, I can do doodles in the margins of the manual, but I'm not a talented sort of painter with light, like a lot of concept artists are. So it was a lot of trial and error, fiddling with dials and things like that. And in so doing, I started to get a little bit of a sense of what the palette was and what sort of techniques I could use, like I mentioned before, saturated shadows and the like. But yeah, it was a little bit ad hoc and slapdash for sure, which I don't necessarily recommend. Starting with something like concept art might make a lot more sense for most people.
Okay, so you used the things you were familiar with, the programs you were familiar with, to kind of put something together, essentially. And I guess you didn't have to convey your vision at first to other people too much, so it was kind of in your head and it could stay in your head in that way, right? For a little while.
And it's lots of floating annotations saying "cool thing here" as a temporary fix.
Well, you realize that there are cool things everywhere in this game.
Hopefully we've hit all those spots and populated them with cool things. Mm-hmm. And then just tools like the color grading and stuff like that are like you said, a way to take something that maybe you're not especially familiar with and map it onto a tool that you are more familiar with, in this case something like Photoshop.
Absolutely, yeah. And Pomo the dog asks, was most of the modeling done with ProBuilder?
So most of the environmental structure of the world is in ProBuilder, so I can show you maybe a quick example.
Yeah, let's look at it
to
real
give you
quick.
an idea of what's going on. I'll just throw open a scene view here for you.
For sure.
I'm still
So we're going to cut to that. Again, if you have any more questions, we can answer a few more before we wrap up. So throw them in there. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah. So here's an example, and I'll sort of highlight individual elements so you can see, what's ProBuilder and what's not. So all this geometry here, that's all ProBuilder. I can turn off that one object, but you'll see that there's still some stuff remaining. So first of all, ProBuilder and its phenomenal stairs tool definitely used a whole lot.
Oh, yes.
As well. And some elements like this, like simple meshes in the corner, those are all ProBuilder. But everything is sort of embellished with props. So
I'm not sure if the screen share is up yet. So I just want to pull up Andrew's screen share. It's up. Okay, sorry. Continue. Yep. It's just not on my screen.
And some of these things are built in Blender, so those are used to sort of embellish what ProBuilder is really good at, very quickly building large, rough shapes, and thankfully this game is mostly built out of large, rough shapes. So that's really, really helpful.
Yeah.
And then to add just a little bit of extra detail, something like this is thrown on there, or a tower. These things are made in Blender.
Okay, cool.
And then
did you
character
UV
models.
them in Pro Builder?
Do I what?
Did you set up the UVs in Pro Builder, or did you take them out of Pro Builder, out of Unity to Blender to UV them, or?
Largely, the automatic UVing in Pro Builder does the job. So all the ground stuff and things like that. This is all just this is a shader that lets me use vertex color to paint on moss. But largely, it's just relying on Pro Builder's sort of tile this texture automatic UVs, which is really helpful. Sometimes I'll even rough something out in Pro Builder and then export that as an OBJ or whatever, pull that into Blender, so I can use that as a starting point, and those UVs are usually pretty decent.
And how are you actually painting on all of that moss? Are you using a specific tool, or is it...
I think that there's another tool sort of adjacent to Pro Builder called Polybrush, which
yeah, okay, I thought so.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I am ashamed to say that I have not used. I instead just go in and edit the vertex colors.
Okay, nice.
So here we've got a little spot there, and maybe we need a little moss there. So I said that's black, and now it's got some.
Oh wow! Okay.
Some moss on it.
Nice. That's an interesting way to do
it. So, maybe a better way to do it would be to go in and actually, paint with a brush or something like that. But this gets the job done.
Again, both viable options, and that's a thing not a lot of people realize. That there's more than one way to do something, right? And there's it's not like there's the right way and the wrong way. There's just a bunch of right ways, maybe just a few wrong ways, but mostly a bunch of right ways. Yeah. We're about to wrap up. Andrew. So Joyce, I would love to hear your final thoughts just in general, and maybe tell people about what you do on Twitter, the game you're working on, and then Andrew, I'd love for you to give your final takeaways on this amazing journey you've had releasing this game. So Joyce, take it away.
Right. Okay. If you want to see a game that's inferior to this one in every way, you can check out my game, which is Astrocat. Which is also inspired by Zelda, but more the 3D Zeldas.
Nice.
That's the game I'm making. And my final takeaway of this whole session is just that I need to use more scrolling textures, because they're simple and they're great, and I need to figure out how to use the cool UVs with the cone, and I'm making weird hand motions now.
I think that's my takeaway too, Joyce. Scrolling textures, need to use more of them. It just looks so much fun. Yeah. Thank you so much, Joyce. And thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to do this. Really appreciate it. Andrew, please.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Andrew, your final takeaways, please.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me here. It feels cathartic to sort of pull back the curtain on something that has been sort of about secrets all this time. But if you're interested in playing Tunic, please, you can get it on Xbox Game Pass right now, or if you want to get it on Steam, you can get it there.
And we just dropped a link in the chat. Absolutely. Great. And if you have do you have advice for the up-and-coming solo developers working on their own game? Maybe something you wish you had heard yourself when you were starting out that maybe you can impart to them?
Joyce, do you want to start?
Me.
You can both go.
The point that was made earlier about getting people to playtest and bounce ideas off of. Yeah. You can always do that. Just go to a community where people are developing games.
Right.
And share your stuff, because it is very important to let other people see what you're working on. Maybe stream your development. That's also very fun.
Yeah, and there's the new...
someone saying don't do it. I would not say that. Someone in chat said that. Do it. Just go for it.
Absolutely, and there's the new software and game development category on Twitch too. So it was just released this year, so it's a perfect time to do that and get people's feedback on the daily. And that's great advice, Joyce. Thank you so much. Andrew, yourself?
Usually when people ask I want to get into game development, what should I do? I think this is good advice. It's just jump right in, and sort of like Joyce was saying, share it with people, and make as many terrible games as fast as you can. Just assume that you've got this queue of games inside of you, and the first 100 of them are really bad. Just so make them as fast as you can to get them out into the world, get some feedback on them, learn from them, and then then just keep going.
Kind of get it out of your system, right? All those different thoughts and ideas, so you can like commit to that one game you're going to work on for a while. Thank you both so much. This was a real pleasure to have you both on here. Congratulations again, Andrew, on your launch. What an effort. Really impressive. Everyone, please check it out. We dropped the link in the chat. Get the game. It's out now. You can play it.